Welcome to day 117. We have 2 Samuel chapter 2, 1 Chronicles chapter 11, Psalm 142, and Matthew 14. It's quite a day. So Saul is gone, and David turns to God for guidance. I think this is a good thing for us to always remember. Before he makes a big decision, he first prays. Following God's guidance, he moves to Hebron, and Judah makes him the king. Now, Hebron is the primary, um, we would say capital city, but the primary city for the tribe of Judah, the area of Judah, the nation of Judah at this time. Now, Saul's son is made king over the nation of Israel, which is pretty much all the other tribes. So, for the most part, 11 tribes are Israel, one tribe is Judah. And then we get a fight between the two groups. We have civil war. It starts kind of like the Goliath story. It is a battle of heroes. They take some of their best warriors from both sides to duke it out. However, in this case, everyone dies. And so it becomes a complete battle between the two sides. David's side ends up being favored in the battle, but there's an interesting death in here. Some guy is hit with the butt of a spear, and it says that it goes all the way through him and he dies instantly. Just a little bit of cultural context here. Most of the spears had a metal piece at the back end of the spear because they wanted to be able to stick it in the ground where it would stand up straight. And so when the guy takes the spear and pushes it behind him, it's not a flat wooden end of the spear stick like many of us imagine. There's actually a sharp piece of metal on the end there. So that makes it easier to go into the guy and then go through the guy. So when we're reading it going, what on earth is going on here? That's just a little bit of cultural information for you. Now, there is value in the burial of warriors. So most warriors were afraid of and did not want their bodies to be left behind after a battle where they would be exposed to the elements and perhaps eaten by wild animals. And so whenever you read about the burial practices and how someone was buried, look at who is being honored with this. Are we honoring the person that has died and is being buried? Are we honoring the people who is respecting the person who died and caring for their body? And so a reflection as we finish this chapter in 2 Samuel, Saul is gone, but David's life is still complicated and violent. There's a fight for power. And I have to really wonder, is this part of why God discouraged Israel's desire for a king? And then how do we treat our leaders? We don't necessarily go to battle and have violence when we're selecting leaders, but how do we treat our leaders? How do we respect our leaders? Do our leaders behave in a way that deserves our respect? And what do we do for the leaders who lose the battle, who lose an election? How do we care for them? How do we respect them? First Chronicles 11. Now, Chronicles and Saul are kind of in parallel here, and eventually we'll be reading Chronicles along with Kings. And Chronicles is talking about the same bit of history of David becoming king in Hebron, which is the primary city of Judah before Jerusalem becomes that. Now, eventually David captures Jerusalem, but at the time it's called Jebus. He fortifies it. It becomes the city of David and becomes the primary city of Judah. But as we're reading this, you're going to see that there's some very different details in between Samuel and Chronicles of what goes on here. There are more details in the Chronicles one, but there's an emphasis on David being a good king and David being anointed, and an emphasis on unity and the people around him. There's another list. Chronicles is big on the lists, and these are David's men, and it lists their accomplishments. And again, it's lifting up David as a great leader, that worthy warriors are following David and with him. Chronicles does remove some of the negatives about David and puts an emphasis on the positive. And there's also more of an emphasis on David as a spiritual figure, which is why we're reading some of the Psalms at the same time now, because some of the Psalms were definitely written by David and come from this time period and reflect some of the things that are going on at this time. So Chronicles is seeing David more as a spiritual figure. Samuel emphasizes more of the military and political side of things. Samuel shows more messiness in David's ascent. Chronicles make it look all much smoother. Chronicles is written at a later time and is really emphasizing how David brought the Judeans together, and eventually they're laying the groundwork for David to bring the entire kingdom back together. Now, David taking Jerusalem was a way to consolidate power. It's a little bit like how the United States created a new capital city in Washington, D.C. This way, none of the family units of Judah had more power over others by their city being selected as the primary city for Judah. So, by taking Jerusalem from the Jebusites who were outside the tribe of Judah, um, it gave the Judeans a city to rally around and a new place to organize themselves and to put the focus on the power of David. As we're reading through here, I just want us to remember that these texts are not just holy books. We tend to think of the Bible as, what's that book of instructions before leaving Earth. The Bible is not just a book of instructions, and it's not just a holy book of comforting devotions. It is a messy book of history and military conquests and family dynamics, as well as the relationship of God's people with God over generations, over centuries. And so, if you're going through here and thinking this is hard, this is complicated, why is some of this stuff in here? Remember that this is a complicated book. It's from many sources over many time periods, and it's talking about our life together here on earth and also our relationship to God. Keep in mind that Chronicles is not chronological. It is written to tell a story about the nation of Israel and its kings. And so some of the historical details have been smoothed over or rearranged to make it an easier story to tell. For example, Jerusalem is captured later and the unification comes later than what Chronicles is indicating here. Chronicles is focused on honoring David and emphasizing unification as its primary goal. Moving on to Psalm 142, there's an incident here, and it most likely refers to 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 3 to 4. And again, it's trying to connect David to the psalm. The cave might be a reference to prison and the feeling of being utterly alone, but this is a good psalm for the times when we feel very separated from God and from others, and it reminds us that we can rely on God. Matthew 14 is hard. We've got the death of John the Baptist here, which is always a terrible story to read through. One of the things that I think we can take away from this story of Herod is that we need to be careful about making grand promises. Just as we read in Judges with Jephthah, who made a promise that he would sacrifice to God the first thing he saw when he returned home, and then his daughter walked out. Herod made a brash promise to his wife, to his the younger woman here, his relative. And when she calls to collect based on a suggestion from his wife, Herod probably had some mixed feelings. He knew that John the Baptist was a holy person. He knew there could be repercussions on the spiritual side from taking this action, but he felt that he had to live up to the promise that he made. So I think we all need to think carefully about the promises that we make in our lives. Now, Jesus wants to be alone when he hears of John the Baptist's death. John the Baptist is his cousin, but he also knows that John was sent by God to live a very difficult life, preparing people to hear Jesus' message. So Jesus wants some time alone, but people find him. He ends up having to heal them. And then it gets to be supper time, and the disciples want to send everyone away. And Jesus is like, no, we're going to feed them. They're like, hey, we've got loaves and fishes, and that's it. But we end up with the feeding miracle of 5,000. Now, there are other versions of this in other gospels, and some of them have more details or different details. So, when you're looking at some of these miracles in the gospels, remember if you're reading through going, this doesn't quite seem like I remember, look it up in some of the other gospels. There are different details in different gospels. Now, after this, the disciples get in a boat to go to the other side of Galilee, and Jesus finally gets some time alone. He goes up to the top of the hill or the mountain to pray. Now, the disciples are on the Sea of Galilee. They're in a boat. A storm comes up, and Jesus walks across the water and takes care of them, gets them to the shore on the other side. Now, as he's coming towards the boat, Peter jumps out and walks on the water, but starts sinking. And they get to shore, and more people gather, and uh, then he does more teaching and healing. So, as we think about this, as we think about Peter trying to walk on water, as we think about the feeding stories, the healing stories, one of the reflections I have for today is the disciples see this feeding miracle. Within just a few hours, they see Jesus walking on the water. And yet they're still filled with doubt, and they're still filled with fear, and there's stuff they don't understand. And so all of this, sometimes we think of the walking on the water as its own story and the feeding the 5,000 as its own story, but it's really one whole day, a day and a night put together in this story. And it makes me think today, what does it take for us to believe? What are the things that we doubt, the things that we fear? Do we take time to notice miracles in our lives? Jesus was very explicit about doing miracles to help people believe when they needed to believe. But do we take the time to even notice the miracles that are happening around us? Do we look for Jesus in our lives? Do we gather, take time out of our lives to be with Jesus? A lot of us assume church is open every week. We have worship every week. But we don't always take time to go to worship every week, to be with other believers, and to spend time with God. The followers here skipped meals to be with Jesus. They had no indication that they were going to have a meal when they came to listen to Jesus and ask for healing. And so I think we have to think a lot about what we are expecting from Jesus, what we're looking for from Jesus, what space we give to God in our lives. Do we give time? Do we go away for the weekend but still figure out a way to find a church service to go to when we're away? Or maybe we make sure our church has something on Sunday evenings or during the week that we can get to. Do we watch online? How do we make sure that we spend time with Jesus every week? I have to really be inspired by all these people who hear Jesus is there and they drop what they're doing and they go to listen to him. And I wonder sometimes if we would make the same choices today. So think about that today, and we'll see you next time.